Good afternoon. I'm Steve Lilliston and you're listening to Bookworms. I have with me today Marilyn Bouzaid, who's going to be helping me. So welcome, Marilyn.
Hi, Steve. Lovely to be here.
Great. So we've got two extremely diverse authors to share with you today. And as you know, the purpose of Bookends is to...
Bookworms. Here he goes again.
I keep on getting that word wrong. Anyway, sorry. The purpose of the show, Bookworms, is that we can present you different authors that we have found either moving in some way or just very interesting, and from different angles. So today, I've chosen an author which I came to love when I first came to New Zealand, which is Katherine Mansfield. Katherine Mansfield is a Wellington-born writer. She was born in 1888. She moved to the UK when she was 18. She went to college first of all when she was 15 in England, and then she was in England for 3 years. Did her finishing, as they used to call it, and then went back to New Zealand. And then shortly after that, I think she was only back for a year or so, she just loved Europe, England so much that she went back and she did the rest of her writing in Europe. It's a long story, I won't bore you with the story, but she very tragically died in 1925. I'll get it right, 1923. And she was 34 years old. So even though she was quite young when she died, she still turned out a prodigious amount of work. So what I've got here today, I've got a couple of readings that I'd like to share with you. And first of all is the one from the Bay. It's called At the Bay. And you may have heard that the house that Katherine Mansfield used to live in is up for sale. Have you thought of purchasing it, Marilyn?
No, but I did see it on TV the other night.
Yeah.
There was a clip about it.
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
It's going to be very expensive, but obviously it's a Heritage Trust type situation. So it's going to be expensive anyway, but it will need a lot of money to restore. Anyway, this At the Bay was set in Days Bay. So, yeah, let's see what you think. So, the back door of one of the bungalows opened, and a figure in a broad striped bathing suit flung down the paddock, cleared the stile, rushed through the tussock grass into the hollow, staggered up the sandy hillock, and raced for dear life over the big porous stones, over the cold wet pebbles, onto the hard sand that gleamed like oil. Splish splosh, splish splosh. The water bubbled round his legs as Stanley Burnell waded out exulting. First man in as usual. He'd beaten them all again, and he swooped down to souse his head and neck. Hail, brother! All hail, thou mighty one! A velvety brass voice came booming over the water. Great Scott! Damnation take it! Stanley lifted up to see a dark head bobbing far out, and an arm lifted. It was Jonathan Trout there before him. Glorious morning, sang the voice. Yes, very fine, said Stanley briefly. Why the dickens didn't the fellow stick to his part of the sea? Why should he come barging over to this exact spot? Stanley gave a kick, a lunge, and struck out, swimming overarm. But Jonathan was a match for him. Up he came, his black hair sleek on his forehead, his short beard sleek. I had an extraordinary dream last night, he shouted. What was the matter with the man? This mania for conversation irritated Stanley beyond words. And it was always the same, always some piffle about a dream he'd had, or some cranky idea he got hold of, or some rot he'd been reading. Stanley turned over on his back and kicked with his legs till he was a living waterspout. But even then, I dreamed I was hanging over a terrifically high cliff, shouting to someone below. You would be, thought Stanley. He could stick no more of it. He stopped sploshing. Look here, Trout, he said. I'm in rather a hurry this morning. You're what? Jonathan was so surprised, or pretended to be, that he sank under the water, then reappeared again, blowing. All I mean is, said Stanley, I've no time to fall about. I want to get this over. I'm in a hurry. I've work to do this morning, see? Jonathan was gone before Stanley had finished. Pass, friend, said the bass voice gently, and he slid away through the water with scarcely a ripple. But curse the fellow, he'd ruined Stanley's bathe. What an unpractical idiot the man was. Stanley struck out to sea again, but then as quickly swam in again, and away he rushed up the beach. He felt cheated. Jonathan stayed a little longer in the water. He floated, gently moving his hands like fins, and letting the sea rock his long, skinny body. It was curious, but in spite of everything, he was fond of Stanley Burnell. True, he had a fiendish desire to tease him sometimes, to poke fun at him, but at bottom he was sorry for the fellow. There was something pathetic in his determination to make a job of everything. He couldn't help feeling he'd be caught out one day, and then what an almighty cropper he'd come. At that moment an immense wave lifted Jonathan, rode past him, and broke along the beach with a joyful sound. What a beauty! And now there came another. And that was the way to live, carelessly, recklessly, spending oneself. He got to his feet and began to wade towards the shore, pressing his toes into the firm, wrinkled sand. To take things easy, not to fight against the ebb and flow of life, but to give way to it. That was what was needed. It was this tension that was all wrong. To live. To live. And the perfect morning, so fresh and fair, basking in the light, as though laughing at its own beauty, seemed to whisper, why not? But now he was out of the water. Jonathan turned blue with cold. He ached all over. It was as though someone was wringing the blood out of him. And stalking up the beach, shivering, all his muscles tight, he too felt the bathe was spoilt. He'd stayed in too long.
It's lovely, isn't it?
What do you think?
I mean, it's a real picture. You can just really visualise it, can't you?
Yes, and what I like about her is that she writes in the moment. It's all happening as you're reading it.
Yes, that's right.
And it's just delightful. The imagery that she summons, and very simple.
And then the little thing at the end, you know, that the tension comes back as soon as you sort of leave that magic place.
Yes.
Yeah, and you come back to reality. You get cold.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's all about the people as well, the manners.
Yeah,
of
the
people
different the relationships between them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was what I thought I'd like to start off with today. And so, Marilyn, tell us a bit about the
Well,
person
I'm doing something totally different. It's just a book by someone called Yuval Harari. Now, he is he's an Israeli historian and a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And he has written the book that I'm going to be reading from, his book Sapiens, which is a brief history of humankind. This was published in Hebrew in 2011 and then was translated into English in 2014. But the book surveys the entire length of human history, from the evolution of Homo sapiens in the Stone Age up to the political and technological revolutions of the 21st century. It's become, it sort of turned him into a celebrity. He's also then written another book, which is Homo Deus, which is the future of man. It's a fascinating book. It's
so Homo Deus takes on from that.
Yes, where we're going, and of course it's a real tome. It's a very large book, and it was lent to me by a friend and said, there's some good stuff in here. I must admit that I don't totally agree with everything, but it's fascinating, and the parts that I really enjoyed was the early chapters. I mean, we go from way back, the cognitive revolution. Then it goes to the agricultural revolution, and then the unification of humankind and scientific revolution. But he sort of has different sort of ideas about how the agricultural revolution, for example, was started, and different. He calls it a fraud. So I just thought I'd just read a few bits from it. I know that you started to read it and found it was just a bit, it was a bit much. I persevered. I was very good, but I did find that it got a little bit bogged down. But this is just a little bit to start with. The agricultural revolution is one of the most controversial events in history. Some partisans proclaim that it set humankind on the road to prosperity and progress. Others insist that it led to perdition. This was the turning point, they say, where Sapiens cast off its intimate symbiosis with nature and sprinted towards greed and alienation. Whichever direction the road led, there was no going back. Farming enabled populations to increase so radically and rapidly that no complex agricultural society could ever again sustain itself if it returned to hunting and gathering. And he talks about the hunters and the foragers. And then his chapter that he deals with this is chapter 5. It's called History's Biggest Fraud. Wow. So he says, for 2.5 million years, humans fed themselves by gathering plants and hunting animals that lived and bred without their intervention. All this changed about 10,000 years ago, when sapiens began to devote almost all their time and effort to manipulating the lives of a few animals and plant species. From sunrise to sunset, humans sowed seeds, watered plants, plucked weeds from the ground, and led sheep to prime pastures. This work, they thought, would provide them with more fruit, grain, and meat. It was a revolution in the way humans live, the agricultural revolution. And then he goes on and he gives a few examples of the different animals and plants and that. But then scholars once believed that agriculture spread from a single Middle Eastern point of origin to the four corners of the world. Today, scholars agree that agriculture sprang up in other parts of the world, not by the action of Middle Eastern farmers exploring their revolution, but entirely independently. People in Central America domesticated maize and beans without knowing anything about wheat and pea cultivation in the Middle East. South Americans learned how to raise potatoes and llamas, unaware of what was going on in either Mexico or the Levant. China's first revolutionaries domesticated rice, millet and pigs. North America's first gardeners were those who got tired of combing the undergrowth for edible gourds and decided to cultivate pumpkins. New Guineans tamed sugarcane and bananas, while the first West African farmers made African millet. From these initial focal points, agriculture spread far and wide. By the 1st century AD, the vast majority of people throughout most of the world were agriculturalists. Scholars once proclaimed that the agricultural revolution was a great leap forward for humanity. They told a tale of progress fueled by human brainpower. Evolution gradually produced even more intelligent people. Eventually, people were so smart they were able to decipher nature's secrets, enabling them to tame sheep and cultivate wheat. As soon as this happened, they cheerfully abandoned the grueling, dangerous and often Spartan life of hunter-gatherers, settling down to enjoy the pleasant, satiated life of farmers. The tale is a fantasy. So that's just a little bit of a taster. After you've done your next bit, we can go on to how he talks about wheat and how that sort of affected people.
I can imagine it makes sense to have had it spring up around the world independently of each other. I mean, humans are humans. They would have all got the idea that things grow and, hey, let's
do something with them.
This and we can do that. So, and then they would have all shared that knowledge at some stage, moving around the world, albeit very slowly, and shared the knowledge of growing. And but they must have had hunter-gatherers. And
yes, they had the foragers and the hunter-gatherers earlier, and so they were just in these small
commingling.
Yes, in the small areas. Yeah. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, excellent. All right, okay. Let's get back to Jane Mansfield. Catherine Mansfield. Jane Mansfield didn't write anything.
No, she didn't write anything. Well, she might have. She might have written a biography, mightn't she?
She might have done.
You never know.
Indeed. Yes. This one is. Where are we? Oh, this is Mr. Peacock's Day. So I won't tell you anything about it right now, but I'll just read it and see what you think. If there was one thing that he hated more than another, it was the way she had of waking him in the morning. She did it on purpose, of course. It was her way of establishing her grievance for the day, and he was not going to let her know how successful it was. But really, to wake a sensitive person like that was positively dangerous. It took him hours to get over it, simply hours. She came into the room, buttoned up in an overall, with a handkerchief over her head, thereby proving that she had been up herself and slaving since dawn, and called in a low, warning voice, "Reginald?" "Eh, what? What's that? What's the matter?" "It's time to get up. It's 8:30. And out she went, shutting the door quietly after her, to gloat over her triumph, he supposed. He rolled over in the big bed, his heart still beating in quick, dull throbs, and with every throb he felt his energy escaping him, his inspiration for the day stifling under those thudding blows. It seemed that she took a malicious delight in making life more difficult for him than, heaven knows, it was, by denying him his rights as an artist, by trying to drag him down to her level. What was the matter with her? What the hell did she want? Hadn't he 3 times as many pupils now as when they were first married, earned 3 times as much, paid for every stick and stone that they possessed, and now had begun to shell out for Adrian's kindergarten? And had he ever reproached her for not having a penny to her name? Never a word, never a sign. The truth was that once you married a woman, she became insatiable. And the truth was that nothing was more fatal for an artist than marriage. At any rate, until he was well over 40. Why had he married her? He asked himself this question on an average about 3 times a day, but he never could answer it satisfactorily. She had caught him at a weak moment, when the first plunge into reality had bewildered and overwhelmed him for a time. Looking back, he saw a pathetic, youthful creature, half child, half wild, untamed bird, totally incompetent to cope with bills and creditors, and all the sordid details of existence. Well, she had done her best to clip his wings, if that was any satisfaction for her, and she could congratulate herself on the success of this early morning trick. One ought to wake exquisitely, reluctantly, he thought, slipping down in the warm bed. He began to imagine a series of enchanting scenes which ended with his latest, most charming pupil putting her bare, scented arms round his neck and covering him with her long, perfumed hair. "Awake, my love." As was his daily habit, while the bath-water ran, Reginald Peacock tried his voice. "When the mother tends before the laughing mirror, looping up her laces, tying up her hair." Sorry, I won't try and sing. He sang softly at first, listening to the quality, nursing his voice until he came to the 3rd line. "Often she thinks, were this wild thing wedded, And upon the word wedded, he burst into such a shout of triumph that the tooth glass on the bathroom shelf trembled, and even the bath tap seemed to gush stormy applause. Well, there was nothing wrong with his voice, he thought, leaping into the bath and soaping his soft pink body all over with a loofah shaped like a fish. He could fill Covent Garden with it. "Wedded!" he shouted again, seizing the towel with a magnificent operatic gesture, and went on singing while he rubbed as though he had been Longren, tipped out by an unwary swan, and drying himself in the greatest haste before that tiresome Elsa came along.
That's another lovely sort of picture of the guy. Yes.
And the attitudes of men towards women in those days.
Oh, my word.
And she picked that beautifully, I thought.
Yes, my word.
And now for something
completely different. So we look at... Oops. I won't throw the microphone away. We look at something completely different, which is about thinking of the agricultural revolution from the viewpoint of wheat. I'll just sort of pick out a few bits of this. 10,000 years ago, wheat was just a wild grass, but suddenly it was growing all over the world. Worldwide, wheat covers about 2.25 million square kilometres of the globe's surface, almost 10 times the size of Britain. And wheat manipulated man. He does within a couple of millennia, humans in many parts of the world were doing little from dawn to dusk other than taking care of wheat plants. And wheat didn't like rocks or pebbles, so sapiens broke their backs clearing fields. Wheat didn't like sharing its space, water and nutrients with other plants, so men and women laboured long days weeding under the scorching sun. And he goes on to talk about wheat got sick, and etc. And then the body of Homo sapiens had not evolved for such tasks. It was adapted to climbing apple trees and running after gazelles, not to clearing rocks and carrying water buckets. Human spines, knees, necks and arches paid the price. Studies of ancient skeletons indicate that the tradition to agriculture brought about a plethora of ailments such as slip discs, arthritis and hernias. Moreover, the new agriculture task demanded so much time that people were forced to settle permanently next to their wheat fields. And so that was when the sort of community sort of grew up instead of them moving on as they had done previously. So it completely changed their way of life. We did not domesticate wheat; it domesticated us. The word domesticate comes from the Latin domus, which means house. And who's the one living in a house? Not the wheat; it's the sapiens. So, I mean, there's sort of gems of all these sort of ideas that he has. And if I can just quickly read his afterword, I think I've got time. He said 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was still an insignificant animal minding its own business in a corner of Africa. In the following millennia, it transformed itself into the master of the entire planet and the terror of the ecosystem. Today it stands on the verge of becoming a god, poised to acquire not only eternal youth, but also the divine abilities of creation and destruction. Unfortunately, the sapiens' regime on Earth has so far produced little that we can be proud of. We've mastered our surroundings, increased food production, built cities, established empires, and created far-flung trade networks. But did we decrease the amount of suffering in the world? Time and again, massive increases in human power did not necessarily improve the well-being of individual sapiens and usually caused immense misery to other animals. In the last few decades, we have at last made some real progress as far as the human condition is concerned, with the reduction of famine, plague and war. Yet the situation of other animals is deteriorating more rapidly than ever before, and the improvement in the lot of humanity is too recent and fragile to be certain of. So he sort of then goes on. I mean, it's a little bit like the ecosystem and the global, the problems in the world today with the animals dying out,
Right.
and worse still, humans seem to be more irresponsible than ever. We're consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's interesting. But at the base of all that, now all the problems of the world today, I think, are all money related, aren't they? Greed, which has caused a lot of the problems we have at the moment, and insecticides, the things we're doing to intensive farming, and we're really
we're getting it wrong, and I mean,
are.
and he does, the sort of his premise there really is that we've come a long way, but have we come very far from the first foragers and the first hunter gatherers and the 2 millennia ago?
Yeah. It seems to me that we had some great ideas initially, but somewhere along the line, I think money got in the way, power,
Greed.
Yeah. If we could have all just taken it a bit easier, be interesting. So the next book,
the next one is Deus, which is about the future. So, he sort of talks about the discovery of the scientific revolution, the discovery of ignorance, and the capitalist greed. And they lived happily ever after, but did they? And the end of Homo sapiens. So yeah, lots of
things to think.
Lots of things to think about,
Yeah,
and I think he certainly has started. I mean, he's a real celebrity as far as that's.
So, what was his name again, Marilyn?
His name's Yuval Harari.
Okay.
Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay.
And he lives in Israel, and he was born in 1976 and comes from Lebanese and Eastern European roots. Yeah.
Okay, listeners. Well, that's fabulous, Marilyn. Thank you for that. So our listeners have got, and watchers, have got a few things to think about there. So I think that's been a lot of fun. So we've covered Catherine Mansfield.
And that is, as I said, is really interesting today with that. Well, it was on the television the other night, wasn't it?
Her house being for sale in Days Bay.
And of course, she spent a lot of time in France too.
Yes,
in Menton.
Right.
Yeah.
In Menton, that's right, Menton. So we hope you've enjoyed the show. Tune in next Tuesday.
Fortnight.
Next Tuesday is a repeat of this program at 3:00, and then the following Tuesday it'll be another couple of bookworms.
Is it you, Steve? Do you know who's doing it next time? No, you don't, because I can't remember either. I forgot to look. It's not me.
I won't spoil their thunder. I can't remember what they're doing either. So it'll be interesting for all of us.
Well, I think it's quite fascinating, all the different ones. I mean, the last time I was on was with Graham, and we did Wind in the Willows and Shakespeare.
Yes.
So
that was a lovely.
So that was quite a lot of fun too.
Counterbalance. Yes. So it was lovely. Well, we hope you've enjoyed that. Please tune in again. And it was a pleasure.
To be a bookworm.
Pleasure to be a bookworm.
And thank you, Steve, for driving the machine.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice week, and we'll catch up with you soon.